So where we left off in our last video was we basically had kind of put ourselves in the place of introducing us to Mudbox, right? Kind of the basic interface. The nice thing is Mudbox is actually, in many ways, easier to learn by. There was less to it, right? We really were able to go through the interface pretty quickly and easily, and there's just not as much to it, which is kind of nice, right? It's a little easier to learn. That's why we can just spend a couple days in it, not doing too much, right? Just some basic painting. So in this case, I already had that layer created from the last video, right? The nice thing is, remember, if you need to create a layer, right, you just kind of click on that white page, you can give it a name, pick the size and resolution if you want to, the format, the diffuse map. 2048s are going to work fine for us. Remember, that's 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels. So 2000 pixels by roughly 2000 pixels. You'll notice there are presets here, and those just scale well, right? It's just the engineers have found that it scales well, works well in real time. It's efficient, right? So you'll find most packages give you a preset, right, of 4096, 4096, 2048, 2048, and that's pretty standard. They technically work well, scale well, efficient when painting and rendering. So most packages you'll find have these same presets, right, for texturing. In this case, I already created a layer in the diffuse channel, so and our default TIFF 8 bits can be fine. So I've already got that, right? You can see I basically took where I left off last time. And of course, remember, you can save these scenes, right? And they'll be their own scenes, their own Mudbox stuff. So in this case, we click on Paintbrush, right? Because that allows us to paint. So the Paint tab right here, right? Paintbrush. Now in this case, I actually want to paint an image. I want to paint some wood on this guy, right? Now, this is going to be when you guys are going to have to find some of your own textures, right? But I've got a big texture library, so I can find some interesting stuff to use. In this case, though, one of the best things to always do with your base layer, your first layer, right? We've only created one layer for this. And we're primarily going to work with one layer for most of our stuff. We'll do a little bit of layer stuff for some things, but most of them, one layer will be fine. What's good is we want this layer to be filled in, right? Because if we don't, there's going to be, even though there's going to be pixels there, they're not going to be filled in with information, right? They're going to be empty, if you will, transparent. And if you try to take that texture back out into another software, particularly Maya, it's going to want to fill those pixels in with a color, and it's going to fill in black. So you'll find that your textures won't come in and work properly, or they'll be really dark. So one of the first things I always do with my first layer, right? So in this case, we just have the one color layer, right? I'm going to pick a color. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to pick it to be a little more brownish color, right? Kind of a little more in the brown range, I think. That'll work. Now, if I scroll down, make our strength back up to 100 though. If I scroll down right here, so there's a little scroll bar on the side, and you can use your scroll wheel for it, right? So your scroll wheel, if your cursor's right here, will scroll down. But there's a little scroll slider there, right? If we scroll down towards the bottom, we can see there's something called flood paint layer, right? So if I click on that, what it does is it floods that whole entire layer, right? So if you look in the UV view, see how it's all filled in? Every pixel. It floods that whole layer. Now, if you create more layers and you put them above it, those don't have to be flood painted, right? Those, you've already got a base layer that's got pixels fully filled in. Those layers, you're meant to just paint a part of it, right? And a lot of it can be empty. You can eventually merge these layers down later anyways, right? We'll talk about that on a later lecture. But if you scroll down from your paintbrush to the bottom, there's a flood paint layer right there, see? So we're just on paintbrush, pick the color, there's this little slider there, we can flood paint, all right? And that just gives us a filled in set of pixels. Now, here's the thing. I want to paint wood, right? Now, I'm going to use projection brush for this, right? There's a button right next to paintbrush called projection brush. And what projection brush does is basically allows us to project paint an image on here, right? A texture. So with projection brush on, I can then pick a stencil, right? So projection brush and stencils go together. Stamps you can actually use with just the regular paintbrush, actually with several of the brushes, right? But projection brush in particular right here, the second brush, is meant to work with stencils. Now of course you can load a stencil in from here. You can go to that little kind of white kind of circle button with the bracket, click on it, add stencil. But if you go to image browser, right? It's kind of this third tab up here, right? There's 3D view, there's UV view, there's image browser, right? So if we go to image browser, it's pretty empty here. What image browser allows us to do, if we go to where it looks like there's like a little opening folder, right? It says a little opening folder right there. If I click on that little opening folder, I can browse and I can go find where my textures are at. So this is going to actually be one of those cases where I'm going to go to all of my stuff here, right? And I've got a folder called textures. This will have to be your thing. You guys will kind of figure out your own stuff. But I can go into textures here and select folder. And now you see it shows all of these folders in here. This is my texture library actually. So you can see I've got a texture library, a bunch of stuff, a bunch of different folders, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of textures. You guys aren't going to have this yet, so you'll have to kind of start finding your own textures for this. But in this case, you'll notice that there are lots of things in here. There's bark, all right? So we can go into bark, and as we go in, you'll see how it actually shows these different textures. Now, the thing is, I can always kind of go back out, right? There's this little browser here. This one right here, this little kind of blue arrow there, will go back out. I can go back out to the main folder, so I can always find a better one if I want to, something that's kind of a little bit more, directly the kind of wood textures I might want to do for this. Just looking for wood textures here. There we go. So there's wood down here. Here's some woods. None of these are really ideal for this, but they'll work well enough for me to show you guys how to use this tool, right? So I can click on this one, and that'll actually kind of bring up some wood textures. And so there's like a couple different types, so you can kind of choose whatever you find would be interesting for your wood texture. I think actually that will work the best. So I can click on that one. But remember, if you click on the folder, you can kind of find your texture folder and just select that, and it'll load in and get you the ability to browse through all your folders and then open those folders up and find the actual images. And you can see them right here. We can then, once we've got one selected, you'll notice there's what looks like a joystick. That's for stamps. And there's one that's a white S, and that's for set stencil. So I can click on that, and you see now my stencil options are up here. Now I'm going to go back to 3D view. Sometimes you have to kind of turn it back on. It's kind of weird that way. So I might go back in the image browser, click on it, S for set stencil. Why are we not seeing you? Oh, on. There we go. Right. So sometimes you have to go back in there or turn it off and on. You'll notice with projection brush on though and a stencil loaded in, you'll see that it tells you how to navigate with your stencil, right? So S left mouse button rotates it, S middle mouse button moves it, and S right mouse button zooms it, right? And so what I can do is I can rotate around, kind of get a different angle, and notice how this image is always staying with the camera. So this really helps to get you guys to understand what projection painting is actually doing. It's projecting from the camera, so it's actually 2D painting on a 3D model. So what I can do is I can just left click drag, and you'll notice it paints exactly the image that I'm seeing right on the model. And of course I can make my brush size bigger, B for brush, left mouse drag to make it a little bigger. Now you'll notice right now that since the stencil's on, we're seeing the stencil options. You can go back to projection brush and get your projection brush options back on, right? And I can just kind of rotate around to this top view here and paint there. There we go. Some painting. And of course we could rotate around to the side. Like I said, S left will rotate it, S right will make it smaller, S middle will move it. It's right there. S middle, left, right. Q will hide it, right? Sometimes I found the Q doesn't bring it back. It's actually a little bit annoying. They kind of broke that, so I probably wouldn't use that much. So I'll set stencil again. Make sure to turn it on, and there we go, it's back. So sometimes you have to kind of go back in there. They kind of broke Q with 2019. What are you gonna do? So we can just paint a little bit here. We said we can just paint really easily exactly what we want on the model. And I'll show you a bit of 2D painting later on in some of our other models. But really 3D projection painting is awesome for a lot of the texturing you're going to do. You just have to kind of get the view you like, maybe get the size you like, and you just kind of be careful when you're painting. Any polygons that face away from the actual camera, the paint will go on a little bit weird and stretched, right? Because technically you're projecting from the camera, and the objects that are facing away from the camera, it's not going to know how to handle them that well. So you will kind of get different views. I'm not going to wear it at the back because we're not going to see it. So in this case, we could probably turn our stencil off temporarily, and we can save, right? And that actually gets us, as you can start to see, some basic core painting. Now I can go back to object list, right? And I can grab one of my other objects, kind of turn the eyeball on for those guys, and I could turn the eyeball off of that one. Right, so remember object list, and you can kind of select and turn the eyeballs off or on. You can lock them too. I like turning the eyeballs off. So we have the layers, and there's no layer for this one, right? Because we only created a layer for the other object. So I need to click on that white kind of couple of pages. We'll call this, let's see, top and bottom, right? There we go. And all the defaults should be fine, 2048, TIFF 8-bit, diffuse. Because all we're really doing is painting color layers this one. And there we have it. And of course we go to edit, deselect all, Control D is the quick key for that, just to get rid of the yellow. In this case, I'll probably go to paintbrush again, and I'll use that same color. We'll go scroll down and flood paint layer. That way we've got fully filled in pixels, right? Because that's our first layer, our base layer, the layer that'll be our bottom, our foundation. So we always kind of flood paint that, right? And that's paintbrush, and then you pick your color. Usually you want your strength at 100, and there's this little slide scroller, although scroll wheel does it too. Flood paint layer. And then of course we can go back to projection brush, and we can go back to image browser, and that's already selected, so we just hit that white S for that stencil. Make sure to turn it back on, right? There we go. And what we could do is we could easily come in here and remember Alt left, middle, and right mouse button for camera navigation, so Alt and your mouse buttons. Remember S and your mouse buttons. So it actually uses that same navigation. In fact, Substance Painter's projection painting toolset for its stencils actually uses the Mudbox quick keys also. So we can easily kind of come in here and get some kind of good little wood right there. Like I said, we'll do a little bit of 2D painting in Mudbox later on, but I really want to get you guys to see the projection painting, right? And you can see sometimes it gets the seam a little weird, so we might make our brush a little smaller to kind of paint this a little better there. Kind of go to the front here, just paints it a little more naturally there. And I kind of feel like that side's okay. And then we'll do the same thing for the bottom here. And I will eventually show you guys isolate select, but for right now this will work well enough just to kind of get us the fundamentals starting for our painting. Alright, so there we go. Like I said, you can always kind of come around and paint the sides a little bit better. Get some paint on the bottom if you're going to see the bottoms. And there we go, we've got that kind of wood. Now I could be using a different wood texture if I wanted to, right? So I think I'll do that on the legs here in a minute. But we'll just kind of turn the stencil off for the moment. Do a quick save. Go back to object list, and we'll kind of turn the eyeball back on, right? So that eyeball column for the legs. And I'll turn the eyeball off for that one off there. And we'll just make sure to select this object just so Mudbox knows it's selected. And we go back to layers, and there's an empty layer, right? So if you did the send to Mudbox one at a time, this is the way it should work, right? Mudbox is really going to recognize each object as its own object that can have its own texture to match its own unique UVs, right? So these UVs are different from the other UVs were. So we'll just do new layer, right? That little kind of couple of white pages. Call these legs. There we go. And of course, we can go to edit, deselect all, because we don't see that yellow anymore. We'll go to quick paintbrush, and just the default color is fine. Scroll down, flood paint layer. It's always good to do for your base layer. And now, of course, we'll turn projection brush back on, right? It's kind of just those two brushes we're going between, paintbrush, projection brush. What I can do is I can go back to image browser, right? It's these tabs up here, 3D view, UV view, image browser. And I'm going to use a different wood this time. I think I'm going to use this kind of more beaten up wood, just to have a really different contrasting color image. You guys will kind of pick your own texture images, right? These just happen to be the wood textures I have on me. And remember, it's that white S, right? It's that white S. But remember, if you need to, this little kind of blue kind of folder with the blue arrow, that'll take you back up. You click on the little opening folder right there, and that'll allow you to actually pick the folder, right? So like I said, I picked 3D art. I went to textures, select folder, and it's that folder itself. And then you just scroll to the subfolder, right? So there's folders within folders. Open up wood, there it is. Click on it, white S, that is now the stencil. Like I said, sometimes you have to kind of do it twice, right? Select it, white S, and there we go. You see how it shows up? Remember, S right mouse button can scale this up so we can make it a bit larger. And of course we can move our camera and we can start to paint this wood. B for brush, left mouse button, right? And you can always switch back to projection brush once you get the stencil you like. So you can adjust your size there, but if you hold down B and left mouse drag, that'll change your brush size. So a nice kind of smaller brush size to kind of paint that on there nicer. You see, we just kind of rotate around the different views just to kind of get some good paint on there. There we go. Remember S middle, we'll move that so we can kind of move it around a little bit. And this will just allow us to kind of paint kind of a neat little kind of wood on here. Maybe kind of get some wood paint started on that one too. Rotate around. Remember, Alt left mouse button rotates your camera. S middle mouse button moves your stencil. S middle mouse button, move that stencil. S middle mouse button. So you can kind of paint these from the same view. And then as you want, Alt left mouse button to rotate your views, and then you can kind of paint again, right? S middle to move that, and you can slowly get some kind of pretty good paint on these guys. So remember, Alt left, Alt middle, Alt right will kind of move your camera, right? Just like they will in Maya. There we go. And of course, S middle, left, and right will allow you to adjust your stencil. So I'm just kind of trying to paint this from a couple different views. Be careful to not paint too much. That's why I made my brush size smaller, so you're not kind of painting on, you want to paint on exactly on the polygons you see. And there we go. And of course, we could turn our paintbrush on. And if we want to, you can always turn stencil off here, right? So see this in the stencil menu down here, there's an off button. And if I go back to object list, I can turn the eyeballs on for these other ones. If you see blue, that's just loading the textures in. Just give it a couple seconds. Eventually the textures will be loaded in. And now you can see we've got all these different textures for our end table. And if you go to UV view, you can kind of see what's happening, right? That's why we lay the UVs out, right? They're two-dimensional, so that we actually paint a picture, right? And these UVs tell the pixels in the picture where to go. So there we go. I can save that.